Legumes are really important in the diet. People sort of have ignored that, and there's quite a few research studies that have now been done showing great value from whether it's chickpeas or lentils or all the different kinds of beans. In fact, when we look at Mediterranean diets, which I've spent much of my life studying, we find that in the areas of the Mediterranean where they have more legumes, that's where you see the very beneficial health effects. So we could all eat more of those foods. If you like tofu, fine. Nuts and seeds. Nuts are probably one of the areas where nutritionists have had to revise their recommendations over the years, because we always used to think, well, they're pretty high in calories, pretty high in fat, don't have too much of them. We now have, at my latest count, 26 studies on nuts. Every single one of those studies has shown benefits. So nuts seem to be really good, and for most of the studies, though admittedly people are often given a set amount of nuts, they spontaneously eat less of something else. So nuts are actually quite filling. That doesn't mean you can't stand with a beer in one hand and a bowl of nuts next to you and overeat them. I mean, you obviously can, but they really are quite valuable foods, not only for their fats, but for a whole range of other what we call phytonutrients. And then we need a good source of calcium in the diet, and if you happen to like milk, cheese or yoghurt, and we say milk, cheese or yoghurt, not dairy products, because some research we did when we were researching the latest dietary guidelines, we found that when people thought of dairy products, they included butter, cream and ice cream, and that wasn't what we were talking about, because there's no evidence that they're beneficial. Milk, cheese and yoghurt, or there are now lots of plant-based alternatives that have calcium added to them. They are suitable for adults. Not all of those products are suitable for children. And if you're tempted by the latest paleo diet, you might have seen in the paper in the news this week. I was asked about this a few months ago. Paleo diets are difficult. I'm really happy that paleo diets don't have junk foods, and I think we agree that that's a good thing. But the problem I had with this new book that hasn't actually come out yet is that they had an alternative to breastfeeding for babies. They did actually say breastfeeding was good, but if you didn't breastfeed your baby, you couldn't give them any infant formula because they're based on milk or soy, and all legumes and things are out of the paleo diet, as well as dairy products and grains. So they've made up this thing from a bone broth, which, as I said, we used to call stock. But they've got this bone broth to which they've added a number of compounds, including some powdered up liver. And the nutrient content, this is for infants, the nutrient content is absolutely appalling. It has up to 800% of the nutrients, of some nutrients compared with breast milk, and none of other vital nutrients. Now, an adult who follows a paleo diet may be able to eat enough of various things to get their nutrients. I don't actually think it's the ideal way to eat, because we've got so much evidence, particularly for bowel cancer and for setting up the right kind of bacteria in your intestine, that shows that legumes and whole grains are really extremely important, and they're both out of the paleo diet. But to give this sort of thing to an infant, if you're going to follow a paleo diet and you want to eat like our cavemen ancestors, you have to remember that their average life expectancy was between 35 and 40, and also they breastfed their children for about 4 or 5 years. You certainly can't substitute a bone broth with powdered liver. It's not going to work. So I've spent most of the week doing interviews with people about this, because I find it quite problematic when people promote things like that for an infant, because an infant really does have very specific needs. But for infants or anyone who doesn't want to have dairy products for these milk, cheese and yoghurt, the rice milk or the oat milk are suitable for adults if they've got added calcium, but only the soy milk is suitable for young children because it has the right amount of protein. The others don't have the right sort of protein. I'm talking here about 1 and 2 year olds. Okay, we're meant to be talking about men today. So how much should men eat every day? I've got a little problem here. At least 5 serves of vegetables. Don't groan, because a serve of vegetables is actually quite small. It's half a cup. If somebody only gives me half a cup of broccoli, I want to know where the rest is, please. It's not a lot. If you go to Turkey, I was in Turkey recently, and I thought, after breakfast we'd already had 3 serves of vegetables. There was this enormous pile of tomatoes and a big pile of cucumbers and things, and I'm thinking, gee, we've done very well here. At lunchtime you got another 3 or 4 serves, and at dinner you got even more. But in Australia, people are eating about 2 serves of vegetables a day, and many meals don't have any vegetables at all, of course. Fruit, 2 average pieces a day. That's twice what the average Australian eats. Whole grains will depend on how active you are, and if you're running, 6 serves won't be nearly enough, but a serve is a slice of bread or half a cup of oats, which would offend my poor husband because he, by the time he's cooked it, it's, really quite a lot. So it will vary according to your physical activity. So, and if you're more active than normal, this is just for people who are wandering around, if you're going off to do triathlons and things, you will need a bit more than that. And in fact, if you're doing triathlons, you might need some of your grains not to be whole grain, because if you're so active that you need lots more, you may find that all whole grains will play a bit of havoc with your intestine. We need 1 to 3 serves of foods from that high protein group, but a serve is very small. It's much less than what most people would eat for their evening meal for meat. And we need to choose more plant sources from that. And 2.5 serves of milk, cheese or yogurt a day. And a serve is 250 mils of milk. So it's actually quite a bit. Very few people actually consume that much. I personally think the calcium level's been set at a ridiculous height. Unfortunately, when people look at how much of various nutrients you need, the committees are often dominated by people who want to give us fortified foods. What about all the extras? Well, that will depend on your weight. For weight loss, you need to get rid of the junk food. Eat the basics and stick to that. But if you increase your physical activity, you can eat far more. I actually live surrounded by, surrounded in one bit by a national park, but my other neighbours are dairy farmers. And I've got some other farmers around in the valley, and they say that when they want to get their animals, fatten up their animals before they send them to market, if you just let the young steers wander around and eat whatever they want, in Kangaroo Valley there's plenty for them to eat because it's a good grass growing area, they don't really get fat. If they want to fatten them up, they have to put them in a small space. And you put them in a small space and curtail their activity, they'll eat much more, which is what we do to chickens. We don't feed chickens hormones or anything. The reason why chickens these days are so fatty is because they're cooped up in a small area and their appetite control mechanism goes haywire, so they just eat all day. So they get very fat. And to a certain extent, that's what happened to us. It's as if we've been cooped up and we don't have any physical activity. Physical activity controls the appetite regulation mechanism. And we can see this. You don't see any fat marathon runners. And they eat a lot. This is just, you can get copies of all of these sort of things. The Australian Guide to Healthy Eating sets out things in the right sort of proportions. And it's all available on the eatforhealth.gov.au website. So physical activity, I'm not going to talk about this because I hope our next talk's going to talk about it, but it's a major controller of appetite. But if you're looking at controlling your weight, you actually need to have 45 to 60 minutes a day. It doesn't have to be all at once. In fact, it's probably better if it's spread through the day. And what you need to do is avoid sedentary behaviour. Just sitting all the time is the real problem for us. So if we look at studies on diabetes, you need to stand up every 20 minutes and move. And that has quite dramatic effects, just moving from room to room. So sending an email to the person in the next room or the other end of the house or having intercoms and things is actually quite disastrous for health. I actually think if we got rid of remote controls for television sets, and if men, I'm sorry to be sexist about this, but if men had to get up and go to the set to change the channel as often as they do and they're sitting on the couch with the remote control, we would have slender men. There are various cardiovascular advantages, lower levels of certain cancers and a greatly decreased risk of osteoporosis. So I'm not going to talk about that today because we're going to have another talk about that. Also great benefits for mental health. One of the best treatments for depression is physical activity, but you need to be in the habit of having that physical activity because to start it when you're already suffering from depression is actually quite difficult.